second now. Hello and welcome to the next episode of the 01 Call-In Show. Welcome to the stream. If you haven't been here before and you like what we're doing here, please hit the like and subscribe button and and the bell icon, obviously, to be notified of any future content. Joining me tonight, we have Scott Williamson. How are you doing tonight, Scott?
Doing wonderful.
Lovely, nice to hear. Right, I'll play a quick intro and then we'll get right into it. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I see we've already got some viewers here, so thank you very much for joining in. In the chat, we have Cat the Humanist. Thank you for joining us again. Also, Scott Williamson, who's kindly co-hosting once again. We also have a couple of new people in here as well, so thank you very much for joining us. The aim of this show is to, have decent conversations with atheists and theists. We do welcome both. We want to talk, obviously, about if you think you've got some evidence for God, we would love to hear that evidence and to discuss that. Or if you just want to talk about the reasons why you believe in religious beliefs, then we're quite happy to talk about that as well. And obviously on the atheist side, if you're wanting to talk about things that may be disheartening you or how to discuss things with theists and find that discourse, then would love to hear from you as well. Me and Scott, we were actually talking before the show about how we're going to go about these conversations, because I don't think we've made it clear on the past two shows. Is we aren't like the Matt Dillahunties and that, where we're just trying to just debunk every idea that theists have. We do seriously want to have nice, polite, calm conversations with people. And actually find that discourse between, us atheists and those theists that are out there. But obviously, at the same time, we do have a high level of evidence needed for us to be convinced by any argument. Last week we had a caller in who was just accusing us of being intellectually dishonest and not accepting, just completely refuting all arguments, which we weren't actually doing that. We were accepting the arguments that he was providing, the philosophical arguments and the biblical arguments, but we were just saying that for us to be convinced, we needed more evidence, because the arguments themselves were bad arguments and didn't hold up on their own.
That's right. A lot of people feel that we don't want to believe, and it goes both ways. Like maybe some atheists will say that theists just want to believe, and while that may be true, what we're trying to do is we're trying to recognize bad arguments or good arguments. Possibly theists can make good arguments. There's better arguments than others, in my opinion. But we'd like to discuss those arguments and point out some of the seeming flaws. And if we're wrong, correct us. We're open to the correction. We want to believe as many true things as we can. We're not trying, like Katie said, we're not trying to just refute and debunk everything you say and look for reasons. We're trying to actually have an open conversation Not that Matt Dillahunty may be doing that. I think that he's just a little impatient and he wants to stay on track with the conversation. And when it gets off track, he's got to correct and he doesn't have a lot of patience, it seems to me, in my opinion. But for us, we're going to try to exercise patience, and we can ask you to do the same thing. We're just going to grant you and give you the benefit of the doubt that you're sincere in what you're saying. And we just want the same respect. We don't, like anybody else, we don't want someone saying, well, you believe in God, but you're just rebelling against God because you want to sin, and you make all these sort of personal accusations that have nothing to do with the argument. Because while I can't prove to you what my intentions are, all I can do is we can agree to talk about the arguments at that point. There's no way I can prove to you what our motivations are, but I can tell you right off the bat that our motivations are just to, find out what the truth is, or find out as much, evidence as we can to lead us in the right direction. And if you can provide that, great, we're open to it.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, as I was saying, obviously, our standards are quite a lot higher than the evidence than we would require for a lot of other things in general life. But that's not because we're being, hard on theists. That's because what religion is asking us to do is change our entire life. Change how we live that life, and holding eternity over our heads, whether that be as a reward in heaven or whether that be as a punishment in hell, which is a big deal. It's bigger than anything else that we've got to deal with in life. So obviously the evidence needs to be extraordinary for the extraordinary claim.
And that kind of brings to mind one bad argument, in my view, which is kind of a fallacious argument in my view, which is it's the argument that you don't lose anything by believing, but if you believe, even if it's not true, you've lost nothing. But if it is true, you get to go to heaven and be with God. That argument is kind of fallacious because it kind of assumes that there's nothing that you're losing by believing. But what people lose sight of is that when you believe in some sort of claim, number one, you may be disingenuous. It seems like what people are asking you to do is to say, put away your doubts, put away what you genuinely think is a problem with this claim, and just say you believe it. Give it lip service. Well, that's a problem, number one, because it seems like God would be able to see through all that if he was really God. If you're a Christian, I think even Jesus says, many will come to me in the last days saying, Lord, Lord, did we not do many great things? And say, and he said, I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of iniquity. So you're kind of asking us to be a worker of iniquity according to that worldview. But the other thing, too, is that even if we were to give it lip service and just to say we believe just so we can get into heaven or something like that, there is a cost. I mean, there's a lot of money, time spent, depending on the religious teachings of this God or this God claim. And so you're asking people to turn their entire lives around for this claim. And so for us, our evidence should be kind of high. It shouldn't be impossibly high, but it should be high enough to where I can easily say, yeah, this looks to be the case. This looks to be like it's probably true that God exists, and this is what God wants out of us. You need to provide all those things for us. For me, my standard is, just if I can say a testable prediction, some sort of, God, if you strike my tree out in my backyard at 5:01 every day, and I can verify it every day when I pray to you that this happens, it seems to me that that's good evidence. That's strong evidence. And I can present that to others, and we can test it, and we can verify it, and we can repeat it. And it seems like a good form of evidence. It may not be the only form of evidence. If you have some more evidence or some other way, because it seems like a lot of Christians don't like that answer that I give when I give it.
Yeah.
It's like they feel like it's a little, you're asking too much or something like that. Well, give me another way that I can test it. Please call us. Let us know what is a good method of knowing that this God exists. Please give us a call. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we're definitely open for having callers in. That's what this show is all about. I'd like to explain as well, if you are wanting to call in, the link is at the top of the chat. I've pinned it to the top of the chat. So if you just click the blue the blue box at the top of the chat, that's the link for the show. If you could leave a message in the chat just to let us know that you are clicking the link, then I can get your name up on screen as well. So if you do want to call in, just do that. Also, if you're not wanting to, because I won't be showing videos in this, it'll just be me and Scott on the screen. So if you are joining with a mobile phone, or you're not going to be sharing your video, just click the drop-down menu when you click the link, and click Disable Video, and then it'll let you join without a video.
Awesome. Yeah. There's a lot of arguments. I've had a lot of discussions this week with people about Christianity in particular. A lot of those arguments sort of centered around what are considered, good qualifying reasons to believe in Christianity. Because my question is, why should I be a Christian? Just as an outsider looking in, why should I be a Christian? And a lot of people will say it's because, you want to glorify God, or, well, it's like, well, why? Why would I want to do that? What's in it for me? And a lot of people are kind of hesitant, but I believe that the correct answer is that so that you don't go to hell, or that, there's got to be some sort of reason. And it seems like if the only reason to believe in God is so that I can live forever, well, maybe I don't want to live forever. I don't know what that's going to be like. I don't know what this heavenly life or this earthly life forever is going to be like that. I don't know if I'd get bored with that. I don't know if it would be, I would not value life anymore after that. It seems like the value of my life comes from the fact that it's rare. Life is a rare thing.
Exactly.
And that's why I want to protect it. I want to cherish it, and I want to live fully as I can, because I know it's short and it's not forever. But if life is just forever and it comes dime a dozen and it's just, where's the value in that? Why would I want something I wouldn't value? Right?
I think we talked about it last week as well. I feel that it's one of the main variables in meaning for life is the lifespan itself. That without that lifespan, if you did live for eternity, then there would be no meaning to life. Because you would just always exist. And I find that lifespan, there's always something that you need to do before you're gone. There's always something that you can do to better life. But if you living forever, then there's nothing that you necessarily need to do to better that life. You've already got eternity. So any mistake you make, you can correct at any point in time. Which just takes all the meaning away.
Exactly. Like I always wondered, if you were a god and you lived forever and you could have anything you want, would you get bored after a while? I mean, is there anything that would excite you at some point? Is there anything that you have to look forward to? It just kind of seems, out of our realm of understanding to even talk about whether we would actually like to live forever in heaven or in bliss forever or not. So that argument right there, just wanting something to be true, first of all, I don't even know if I want that. So to be a Christian, if that's the reason, well, I don't know if that's a good reason or not. I can't understand that. I can't understand living forever. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it entails. And we read in the Bible that creatures that live forever, like angels and demons, well, they have free will too, and they get kicked out of heaven, and there's war in heaven, and there's suffering in heaven, and there's all this kind of stuff. I don't understand why heaven is supposed to be so great if there's this war and this battle and there's all this stuff going on. You know,
yeah, I've made a fatal error. Sorry, everyone in the chat. I started a new stream because of sound issues, so I'm going to unpin that message. And I was wondering why people weren't joining. I pasted the wrong thing. I'll paste that one.
Oh.
Yeah, replace pin message. There we go. Sorry, everyone, if you were trying to click that link. Yeah, we had some sound issues and had to start a new stream, and I completely forgot to change the link. So I'm very sorry about that.
Yep, join on in.
There we go. We've got someone straight away. Hello.
Hey guys, let's see. Second time listener, first time caller. How are you both? Scott, Borg.
Hey, how's it going?
Absolutely fine. Sorry about that link.
It's all good.
I put the wrong one in there. Sorry.
Don't worry. It's the internet. What are we to expect except technical issues at times?
Exactly. What were you wanting to chat about tonight?
Well, let's see. I believe this is one of those call-in shows where it's kind of like the atheist experience. You can bring up a certain subject related to God, theism, atheism, and just go on discussing it. I think both of you fine fellows would probably be interested in that one. And I'd like to just ask about another possible path of showing God's existence, or more specifically, the truth of Christianity. So would you guys be fine with that?
Oh,
Yes,
absolutely.
Oh, by the way, fellas, guys, I hope you guys know, I'm not being gender specific with that. Just to make sure I'm not insulting anyone.
That's fine. Don't worry
All right.
about it.
So, so the way you kind of, Scott, went about asking about showing or demonstrating something's existence or the truth behind something seems to me to be what's called evidentialist or empirical based. Similar to like a scientific experiment, you have a hypothesis, you test it out, you find the parameters in which it's falsified, the experiment is replicable, and as that goes on and on, you're more certain, although never absolutely certain, that such a thing is true, and you more or less assent to it, correct?
That is correct. That's one example that I can think of, yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, I just wanted to ask, what are your opinions on more a priori deductive methods? So, like a case example pretty much everyone knows is something like mathematics or a Euclidean geometry. You basically start off with like axioms that you don't demonstrate. You just start off with them because they seem self-evidently true, and then you work your way up, and then you come to a conclusion that follows. So, for example, there exists no triangle such that it has an interior sum more than 180 degrees. Would you accept that as being a method of getting and acquiring knowledge about the world?
It would be really interesting. What I would always keep in mind is that with axioms and then you're arguing within a framework.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of are just assuming that if this, then that. So you're kind of arguing within this framework.
Mm-hmm.
However, if the framework is pretty sound or valid, at least, it's something that we can kind of sink our teeth into, I would be willing to hear about that. Absolutely.
Yeah, most proofs of God's existence are usually made in that kind of format. And the thing with deduction is you have to be very airtight. So if there's like an alternative possibility or any room for a possible alternative, then the argument is, I wouldn't say firmly defeated, but at the very least, it becomes likely to deny it without sacrificing any sort of rationality. All right, so a good example of this is all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is immortal. I'm mortal. So you don't really need to, with those two premises, you could just be guaranteed that the conclusion follows because you're certain of the first and second premise there. You don't really need to go any further. Now, when it comes to theism, perhaps the argument that I usually like to start off with is something along the lines of, St. Augustine's argument for the existence of God from truth. So he starts off with three possible options for what truth is. And the first proposition would be truth is either more fundamental to the mind, as fundamental as the mind, or less fundamental. So something less fundamental than the mind would be like truth is a kind of fiction. Maybe it's very helpful. Maybe it's something that's more pragmatic. We define features of the truth and we use that to more or less help us navigate the world. The second is that truth is something that's basically on par with the mind. It's something that's like ingrained into it. You can't deny it, but at the same time, you can't really be certain it's more fundamental to it. Like truth doesn't exist out there in the universe. And the most fundamental one is that truth is more fundamental to the mind, that it exists before it, and that it even goes past space and time, matter. It transcends basically everything. So usually for this argument to go through, usually I have to accept the third option and more or less reject the first two. But before even doing that, I just want to say, just from the way I outlined it, between the three options I've kind of given, which one would you be more partial to?
What would you say, Katie?
Well, when it comes to like things transcending space, time, matter, that sort of thing, I think that you need, you need to be able to demonstrate that firstly, that anything could exist beyond space, time, and matter. So I have no evidence that anything can exist past that point. Okay. So I would be more inclined to say that truths can be objective. So there is certain truths in the universe that we know are objectively true. So I would say that truth is separate from the mind in that sense. Okay,
and you, Scott?
Yeah, that's the difference. We're talking about there's a difference between epistemology and ontology.
Right.
So, there's the obvious thing that we can only know what's within consciousness, what's within our mind. So, even science is done in consciousness, so to speak, which is a terrible way to put it, by the way. But it's just that it's kind of hard, separation is kind of a mental project, if you will. So it's kind of weird to talk about in that way. So ontologically, so all I really know is that I'm experiencing this world of separation, this world of this and that, of referencing things and causality, and there's causality, then there's effects, and then we derive logic from that, and we can infer from there. But ontologically, to say what grounds all of this stuff. I mean, epistemically, I'm kind of stuck in a circularity. I only know I experience because I experience. But if we talk about, well, where does this actually come from? Well, it goes back to Descartes' demon. Right. I mean, how do we know that we're not just a brain in a vat, that we're not being triggered by Descartes' demon? There's all these questions that come out, and this is where my agnosticism kind of plays in. So my atheism is sort of informed by my agnosticism. So I don't really know what's outside of my mind, so I can't really say anything about it one way or the other. I can only infer what works in my experience and things of that nature.
But you would believe that you're rational in holding that Borg exists and that I exist and that everyone around you exists. Like, chances are someone could propose solipsism to you, and you'd probably be like, I would. That's a nice pet, unfalsifiable theory, but that's not really workable in real life. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, and that's fair. So metaphysically speaking, or ontologically speaking, you don't really know how to like a priori get past your consciousness. But from a prudential standpoint, your position would be, yeah, like that's all theoretical. In terms of how I go about my life in terms of application, yeah, I hold that the world is objective, that I'm interacting with it, that cause and effect are real, all that stuff.
Yeah, it could be that I am a mind within a greater mind. It could be the case that I am experiencing. It's kind of like your dream. Say you're in a dream, and in your dream, you're dreaming of other people, you're dreaming of mountains, you're dreaming of trees and people that you interact with. Well, it's all taking place in your own mind. But sometimes these characters or beings within your dream are their own person. So it could very well be possible that I am like a figment of God's imagination or something like that. It could be.
Right.
But it could also just be the case that this is base reality and that we are separate minds, that it's a materialistic, physicalist, naturalistic world. It, by all measure, seems to be the case that that's how it is. It could be the fact that that's what the cosmic mind wants me to believe. I could be in the Matrix, but I don't know that one way or the other. So I'm kind of still going back to that hard problem right there, and so I remain agnostic. I mean, I've heard a lot of these arguments, and yeah, they simply bring up good questions. They're really great questions, and they're really good possibilities. Maybe I don't even know if they're possible. I can't really figure out how possible these things are. That's how bad it is. So at the time, and even, we were just talking about this earlier before the show, is that, there are scientists that take this question very seriously, the ontology of the universe, like origins and things of that nature. And they're really doing math to figure out, and there's all sorts of models on the table. There's anthropohedron, model. There's the cyclical universe theory. There's, the quantum fluctuation type of thing, the big crunch. There's multiverse. There's God theories. There's all sorts of things. And they all fit. There's valid mathematics for all of it, right?
Right.
So
okay.
It just seems like there's everything is equally refuted. So it makes it hard to say. It's like if you would say, well, like say the something like the cosmological argument. So it would say, well, if everything began to exist, then the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause is what we call God. Well, that cause we could also call the multiverse, or we could call it quantum fluctuation, or we could call it some other unknown natural thing that we just haven't discovered yet. So it's all sort of explained in the same equal way.
Right. So I'm not going to defend the cosmological argument here. Usually I just go with the ones that I find the most convincing or I've been convinced by. And one of the reasons why I'm more taken to this like transcendental sort of argument is because I've actually always had a fascination with the most fundamental truths. Specifically, math, as you said, is very integral to it. Not to mention like first principles of logic. I think it was one of my favorite philosophers, Avicenna, who said, if somebody denies the law of non-contradiction, feel free to beat them and burn them until they admit to be beaten is not the same as to not be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as to not be burned. I think you could apply that to the solipsist or someone else. But one of the reasons I find those more or less universal principles fascinating is because of the fact that all the other domains of science seem to need to presuppose them from the get-go. And there was a very interesting argument given by two philosophers, Quine and Putnam, where they basically said, look, as a matter of fact, in terms of our best scientific theories, we always have to accept the existence of the entities that are within them, especially if they're requisite for it to operate. For example, if you were someone who accepts the old a geocentric model of the universe, where you had to posit these mechanics to make sure the planets align properly, chances are the people who would have posited them would have believed they would have existed, even if that theory was ultimately falsified. And even today, scientists, there are things which we affirm now that exist, which were once posited or just assumed into the model. Like, I believe dark matter was one such thing. Right. And it's not like people just called it a fiction and just called it a day. Well, maybe some might have. But likewise, mathematical entities, truths of logic, those are things which I would say are always taken by us as being assumed. They don't seem to be, to me, to be reducible by matter, because matter itself actually can't encapsulate all of math. For example, the square root of -1. Like, you can't really show or exemplify that in mathematics. I mean, well, you can in math, but not in matter. I don't think there's a material instantiation of that. But at the same time, it seems that our best theories suppose those, and it's not like we can selectively choose the entities our best theories posit. So I would say that mathematical entities of logic, those things would actually be instances of entities which we all accept. They seem to be transcendent, and they seem to even go beyond the material universe that shifts and changes. They seem to be necessary.
Well, you're not the only one to feel that way. I mean, there's a lot of mathematicians and physicists who agree with you right there. Like Roger Penrose, he's one big one who says that reality is made up of three things here: mathematics, the material universe, and consciousness. Those three things are what comprise reality, because if you're not conscious, there's no reality. If there's mathematics to describe the structures underpinning the material, if there's none of that, there is no material. And then, of course, the material emerges from the information structures. Max Tegmark also wrote a book called The Mathematical Universe, and he goes into all of that, the mathematical structures. These are called sort of like Platonic values, sort of like brute facts about the universe that are informational. And then our language of mathematics simply describes that structure, that sort of transcendent entity that you're calling, that object is what you're calling it. That may be true. Right. It may be true. That may be the brute fact of existence. If you want to call that God, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I mean, that's just a label, but it doesn't get you to a personal God. It doesn't get you to a God that, is all loving. It doesn't get you to Christianity. It doesn't get you to any of these, Abrahamic religions. But it maybe gets you to some form of deism or some form of pantheism. I'm a naturalistic pantheist myself. So I kind of along with that idea that you're talking about, but I don't know for certain. Either way, naturalistic pantheism seems to work, because anything that the supernatural God claim can explain, well, natural things can explain the same, if not even better, because at least we have evidence of the universe. We have evidence of the laws. We have evidence that math works and all of these things. So it's kind of like I have a stopping point, just out of genuine intellectual honesty about it.
Right.
Are you a Christian, by the way, or anything like that?
Yes, actually I am. I'm a Roman Catholic. In fact, I'm very glad you brought up the pantheistic elements, because I actually became a Catholic mostly through studying the scholastics. So think of guys like Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, as I mentioned, and they were heavily influenced by guys like Plato and Aristotle. Except, with Christianity, many of the church fathers ended up taking the Platonic forms and just putting it into the mind of God. And that's right. And the reason why they did that was, well, numerous. Of course, they were convinced of it by the faith. Even Justin Martyr was a Platonist before he became a Christian. But it's not even just that. First off, there's the notion of a personal God, basically one who interacts with the universe. And the reason why I mostly lean to a notion of a personalistic God is also because of the nature of necessity. Necessity is just, in philosophical terms, it means that something by dint of what it is must be that way always and without any kind of change. So, for example, in this discussion, I'd say didn't need to happen. Maybe I chose to do something else instead of coming on to YouTube. Maybe I decided to make myself a sandwich or something. I promised I'd be here last week, so I didn't do that. But this is something that was an effect of my own free decision. Likewise, if the cause of likewise, if there was a cause to which interacts with the universe itself that doesn't act freely, but just out of necessity, then I don't see how that doesn't transplant right into the universe itself rather than as a free choice. On top of that, the reason why, a Platonic theism strikes me as more, how should I put it, satisfying, is because if there are these Platonic objects that are inert, don't really interact with the world, then I'm not really sure how we've come to know them and discover them. It's even evolutionary mechanisms. They rely on environmental pressures, and they select which species survives and goes on and which ones do not. I hope I have the evolutionary theory pattern down. Science is not my forte. But anyway, whereas under theism, that's more explicable because at the very least, God doesn't work as a necessary cause, but he acts as an agent cause, someone who can or cannot do something, who does or refrains. And on top of that, it explains also why we've come to have knowledge much more than a naturalistic mechanism, which is usually more deterministic. Sometimes there's a bit of randomness to it, like, again, environmental pressures. Random mutations also affect the way we develop too. And that's kind of why I found the theistic model of Platonism to be satisfying rather than having a more secular Platonic model. Your thoughts?
Katie, I have a million things I want to say, but you can right ahead.
Like we've now jumped into, like, you mentioned in there it's more satisfying. I'm not sure that that makes a very good argument.
Can I explain what I mean by satisfying?
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very ambiguous term, so I'll just be a little more exact. It answers more questions than it brings up. That's what I mean by satisfying. So go on.
Yeah,
I hope that clears things up.
Yeah. You said you had some things that you wanted to mention there, Scott. I won't take your time.
Things I just wanted you to get a chance to address it all because so many things were said there that are so great. Those are great thoughts. Those are things just thought about in depth. Like a lot.
Could I clarify one thing? Because if I accidentally was gish galloping or just vomiting a lot of stuff at you, I really apologize.
So I love it. Your stream of consciousness kind of like flows with mine because I'm like thinking in the same terms and in the same way. And I understand exactly where you're coming from, actually. But what I would say is that I would pick the first thing I want to pick is about the evolutionary explanation, if you will, for ontology or truth or whatever. The thing about evolution is we know that we don't evolve to know truth. We know that. The game of life, there's a simulation out there that's called the game of life. And it's just basically a situation where it's just randomness, total randomness. If you just put two little things together, over time and through interactions, you get this entire ecosystem of entities that interact with each other and create even more complex systems. Right. And this is all based on chaos theory. And chaos theory applies to like weather, the economic system, the markets, biology, you name it. Chaos theory, is applied in all this, not just in theory,
Mhm.
but just in practicality, and it works. And so it's pretty safe to say that from a totally random point of view, you can get order in things like systems and structure out of chaos over time. If given enough time and enough factors, you can get all that. And so from the perspective, though, of being within that system, you're stuck in a system that is totally coherent. And from our point of view, it seems like it makes sense that our intelligence that seems to work and coordinate with this coherence, it seems that it should apply universally. But what we've also figured out is that there's some fallacies with that idea. It's called it's a division fallacy, where we think that because we make sense of these systems and we're a system within a system, that it's just systems all the way down. Or it's kind of like saying that, here's a round building made out of bricks. Well, obviously we're in a round building, therefore all the bricks must be round. That's not necessarily true. Right. So it doesn't really follow, you know what I mean? So it seems that from some other thing, we can get emergent properties like, systems like this that we see, like consciousness is a system, like logic, like all of these things that these higher order sort of systems sort of emerge from chaotic, simple systems that, given enough information. There's another guy you should read. His name is Seth Lloyd. He's actually one of the pioneers of quantum computers.
Okay.
And this sort of goes into my pantheistic thing. So this guy, he kind of said, you know what? He goes, I think that the universe is sort of like a huge quantum computer. And so all the scientists, everybody was like, oh, that's pseudoscience, that's crackpot stuff, that's, whatever. And he's like, no, I think it is. And I have reasons. And he had mathematics, and they're like, well, anything can be shown mathematically given a certain axiom and blah, blah, blah. Right. So he went out and he created a quantum computer. And now we've got quantum computers. Quantum computers do not actually take bits and bytes and process them. It actually hacks into the processing that's already going on in the universe. So the universe is just spitting out random information from the ground up. And the quantum computer exploit that, and we can direct it any way we want. We can make programs. We can do things with it, coherent things. So this is sort of like proof of concept that, the universe is just an information system. Right. And this information system, out of this information system emerges all sorts of other systems, all sorts of stuff. So to say that because, to sort of, out of the system that we find ourselves in, to just assume that God or something like that is kind of open to error. We can be really open to error because of that. That the best we can say is that we just have random information coming out of the bottom up of the universe, the very bottom, the quantum level. We have nothing but information, a wave state of where, until something's observed or interacted with, it's just all over the place. It's non-local. It's entangled. It's a wave. I can't even think of the name of it now. It's a quantum wave state. It's kind of like a universal wave function. There we go. So it's a wave function. So once all this stuff starts interacting, we get these systems, these complex high order systems, and it can be deceiving to a mind like ours. We can kind of project our own system onto the system, if you will. Right. That's just my thought on it. But I would definitely look into it. But you're right on the right track of thinking. You're really tapping into some things that can lead you into deeper understanding.
Right. I mean, a lot of stuff is theoretical until it's applied. Like even Newton, when he was proposing gravity, everyone thought that was pseudoscience originally because it sounded like all the Aristotelian stuff. At least that's what Noam Chomsky says about it historically. In fact, before it, someone like Galileo proposed that really the fact that the Earth goes around the sun explains waves, which just ended up being debunked. Now, I really like the point you brought up about being cautious about projecting our own mind into our mental system onto the system of the universe. Mm-hmm. So the analogy you gave was with a brick wall. Just because you have a circular wall of bricks doesn't mean that each brick itself is circular or curved. And I agree with you on that one. Now, this doesn't mean it's necessarily false either, because if you have a wall that's completely brown, it doesn't deductively show that all the pieces are brown, but you could be assured that all the bricks themselves are brown. And it's not until you get to like a microscopic level where color doesn't transmit, where it becomes clear and see-through.
Right. We see emergent properties all over the place. So, and it's a very intuitive thing to think that systems are just systems, that it's systems all the way down, complex systems all the way down. And these emergent properties, though, are sort of seen in nature. So, you know, it while on the one hand, it could be that everything is like, let's say, idealism, for example. Right. We're conscious, therefore the whole universe must be conscious, because how else could we make sense of it? How else could we explain consciousness? Otherwise, it's a hard problem, because materialism simply says that consciousness comes out of unconsciousness, which is a massive problem. You know, how do you explain how something as tangible as matter can become as intangible as something like an experience? Like, it's a real hard problem, and philosophers are really looking at that, right. And scientists, neuroscientists look at it too. But we know that there's a strong correlation between the brain and consciousness, although there's still problems, because after all, if you just magically put enough material together, we're saying that like a genie out of a bottle, an experience is supposed to arise. There's nothing in physics that predicts that that should even happen. No matter what, no matter how much stuff you put together, no matter how complex it is, it doesn't seem like it follows that something like an experience. But we do know that consciousness exists because we're all conscious. Right. So there's got to be some sort of thing. So, and we know that consciousness is tightly correlated to brains, to matter, to embodiment in some form. So that leaves me just at the question of, I don't know. You know, I don't really know. We see emergence. We see how wetness comes from water molecules and stuff like that. Maybe it's a category error. I don't know. We just have to find out, you know.
Right. Yeah, it sort of feeds into what a point I wanted to make as well, which is when you're using, like, you know, arguments from necessity, as you mentioned. You know, you've
argument to avoid necessity, just to clarify.
Yeah, so when it comes to necessity, you've got to be very careful, you know, what you're categorizing as necessary, and make sure that you're not you're not talking from a small sample size. So, for instance, like, you know, it's necessary for, you know, us to, for instance, have water to exist. You know, now we only have a sample size of one planet that we know life exists on. But so, you know, we can't say that, you know, you need water to, you know, life always needs water to exist, because it could be that it doesn't need water as we have it on this planet to exist elsewhere. Right. So you know, you've got to be careful with, you know, the necessary argument.
All right. No, and that is fair. Although I just want to make just a clarification on what I mean by necessity. So there's a difference between a practical necessity on the one hand and an absolute and a necessity in a metaphysical sense on the other. So, for example, it's necessary that in order for you to have water, you have to have hydrogen and oxygen. That's just from what we know water to be by its nature. However, me needing water to live, that's a necessity too, but only if I want to live, for a practical matter or an end. So I mean it in like the first sense of it has to necessarily happen, and it could not have not happened. And I am somebody who, because I'm also, this is kind of another supposition I'm bringing into it. I'm also a moral realist. I'm not sure if you guys share that one with me. I believe that morality is something which is objective. And that just goes back to my notions of common sense, like, for example, systems of logic, not to mention math, and even just consciousness, the understanding that other people exist. I would always just go back to that little thought experiment Avicenna had, which is beating and burning. Now, I know that sounds, from a religious person, that isn't a good vibe you want to hear as a non-believer, but I promise you, I'm only using it for exaggeration.
Okay.
So if somebody denies if someone doesn't believe that I exist, I'm a figment of my imagination, well, would their experiences really back that up? Chances are, if I was beating them and burning them, they would still say, stop, no, don't hit me, don't burn me, give me a sandwich, rather than the opposite, which is, I really wish I'd stop imagining this. Like, one's experiences doesn't really work well with that supposition. And likewise, I think that everyone is a moral anti-realist until such a time when they have to invoke truths of morality. So it's one thing to sit in our armchair and say, yeah, that's just subjective. Everyone really has their own preference they project onto the world. But I really think that as a fundamental category of thought, morality is also something which is true. And I think that the existence of free will, in order to exercise that morality, needs to be there. And that's why I think that Platonic objects, non-personal objects, anything which has a causal interaction out of necessity and therefore necessitates your own actions, is something I would say that is a problem with that theory. It has a very high price tag to come along with it, whereas I think theism doesn't really fall under that error, unless you'd like to argue that maybe omniscience kind of prevents us from having free will because God knows about it, or how does he even have free will because doesn't he foreknow his own actions, something along those lines. So I'll let you prod me from there.
Well, I personally, I'm a determinist, so I don't actually believe that free will it exists at all. It's just an illusion that our brains, that is emergent from our brains to explain why certain things are happening. So I don't think any of us have free will. So for me, it's not really even a problem.
All right.
There.
Yeah, I would sort of agree. Like, I feel like there's a lot of problems with the libertarian free will proposal, because we're not free of causation. We live in a universe of cause and effect. So whereas there may be, at least, at the fundamental level, there's randomness. But then after a certain point, after a certain threshold of interaction, things become very deterministic. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true all over the place. At least some of the smart people that study this stuff can argue about it, but it seems so much easier for me to understand the world as a very deterministic sort of world universe, because if not, nothing really has too much meaning. Everything would be random and kind of incoherent. But because we see order, we see coherence, we know that this happens, this is cause, and all of these sort of patterns emerge. It just seems that this deterministic story holds up. It makes a lot of sense. The other thing, too, is like you mentioned about the omniscient God. If God is perfect in his knowledge, he knows everything perfectly, that means he would know every decision he was ever going to make. He would know every decision you were ever going to make. And if just by him knowing that in itself implies that this thing is going to happen, regardless, even if God changed his mind, if his knowledge is perfect, he would know that he was going to change his mind. In fact, he wouldn't be changing his mind at all, because if it's all in his mind for this thing to happen, so it just doesn't really hold up in that aspect either. And it seems like there's another counter to that whole thing. The universe could be a system of just infinite possibilities, and it seems like that's what many of our scientists are like. The anthropohedron idea is that the universe is kind of like a at bottom level, it's sort of like a landscape of possibilities, and that and that there's no choice in it. Something has to be actualized. And that there's so many possibilities. Every possibility has to be actualized in some space. And so there's just all these different, and some people describe it as the multiverse. Some people describe it in different ways, but it seems to me that kind of, now you could argue that is sort of mind-like in a way.
All right.
That's sort of an idealistic argument that I'm making here. It kind of seems like what I'm saying is kind of like you're sitting in front of the refrigerator trying to decide, do I want milk or do I want chocolate milk? And you're sitting there thinking about it, and then one has to be actualized. You make a decision, and so it collapses into that reality. You get the chocolate milk or you get the milk. So in a way, it kind of sounds like I'm saying the universe is like a big mind or a big mind-like thing. But again, labels, we're getting back into just limitation of language and things of that nature. It still doesn't get me to Christianity or Islam or Hinduism. It doesn't really get me there completely. It just simply says that there's some necessary aspect to the universe that things had to collapse into one way or the other, or all ways. And in either case, it's a deterministic process. In either case, once it becomes actualized, then you're kind of determined to follow through with that reality. And so the whole Christian notion of God being omniscient and yet free, and then we're free agents because we're in the image of this God, has logical problems that I see. Now, I know that there's math that can actually refute me on that. I already know that. There's math. If you dig down deep enough into the mathematics, you can make it work. I've had somebody do that. What's his name, Katie? I think his name was Math Pig. Forgot his name. But yeah, he explained how even that's, but I don't know this. So I'm still kind of agnostic on it. I don't know. I can't argue stuff. Like, it's beyond me. Stuff is way beyond my pay grade.
Yeah. So going back to the good, does God exist sort of thing? I mean, I feel that you've got to go with what you know. So you've got to go with the evidence that you have for things and what makes more sense. Given what it is that you know. And from what I see is we don't actually have any suggestion from the evidence that there is a God there, and from all the gods that I've researched, they all have logical problems with that particular existence. Or you've got to start throwing away certain things that you already know to make it work. Which is a big problem. And you'd think for a question as big as, is there a creator of the universe, and what is that the creator's plans for me? You'd think that there would be a hell of a lot more evidence to support that than what we actually do have, without having to rely purely on philosophy to get us to, or theology even, to get us to that answer.
That sort of has like a subjective, and I admit it's sort of a subjective thing, but it's sort of a problem for me. It's like, why does believing in God require so much mental gymnastics and so much philosophy and so much digging? Now, one could say that that's the purpose of life. But again, the whole conundrum is it cuts both ways. It cuts both ways. It's like you can say, well, God doesn't want you to figure him out, so he puts you in this, maybe, it's like if we just free our mind up and just kind of just play this game, and just play along with it and say, well, if God lived forever and he's anything he wants is possible. After a while, you would think you'd get bored. Like, what's next? Well, maybe he wants to become human so that he knows what it's like to be limited and be scared to die and be all these things and want to figure stuff. Maybe that's enough to kind of keep him busy living through all these people. But again, all of this stuff is just, and I mean, there's religions that teach stuff like this. Like there's Hinduism that, there's reincarnation and we're all Brahma and all of this kind of stuff. But all of this stuff are just good questions. They're just really interesting questions and they're really cool. But I don't know how possible any of it is. Right. Absolutely none.
So, all right. So a few things. One, in terms of that possibility, I think I already believe that God at least became human once. So, so your speculations already sold me. There's that. But just to go back up to the more fundamental stuff you were saying, and let's go back a little to free will. So I'm somebody who might just put a lot more stock into what seems to be the more common sense view. And by common sense, I just mean what seems the most obvious. First, and then if something I think is very troubling about that position or is ultimately undermined, then rethink common sense. But I always like to give it the benefit of the doubt first, and then see what follows if it doesn't accord with something. And I think in terms of religious people going to more philosophy-based stuff, I think everyone really is trying to find something that explains their general experiences. I think if I was an atheist at one point, I have a very deep religious experience that pushed me back into the Catholic, into Christianity in general, but I didn't become Roman Catholic until I studied scholastic philosophy. And that's really what pushed it there, because that best explained my experiences, where I think that if you're generally somebody who's had if you're someone who doesn't really come from a religious background and all you saw was the same old, you might tend to more naturalistic explanations. Now, that doesn't mean it applies to every single atheist. I know very many who were devout religious believers who would testify to their religious experience, but say that ultimately there was just so much trouble with according it to reality and what they saw, or maybe a personal experience, or maybe there was just something intellectually deeply troubling that they left. But I think everyone generally likes to go with what they generally experience and then find some way of explaining it later on. So there's that. But the issue I want to touch on free will is this. I think that a lot of the time when we think of everything as being cause and effect, we think of it in a way which is very deterministic and mechanistic. So gear A moves this way, and then it pushes gear B, and gear B moves gear C. And basically it's mechanistic because one thing just follows another deterministically. However, when I push for what's called agent causality, I'm saying that I am less like that gear, and I am more like a special kind of entity that can pick one of two outcomes, and I'm the cause of that. So think of it this way. In the medieval era, they didn't have a very scientific explanation for heat. If somebody was to ask, why does heat heat something, they would just say, well, that's just what heat does. It heats stuff. There was nothing more fundamental to it. So if you're going to ask an agent, why did you choose A over B? They might give you reasons. Well, why did you reason like this? And so on and so forth. Ultimately, the response is, well, that's just the kind of thing my free will does. It picks one of two options. And some people might label that as random, but there's a difference between randomness in the effect and a free choice. So think of it like this. The sun has the power to produce two different kinds of effects, depending on what it's affecting. So the sun could melt something or it could boil something. Both of those effects are possible, but the source is still the same. However, when it's boiled or when it melts, that's explained in the object, not the or the effect, not the cause. Whereas with an agent cause, when I make a decision, that's not explained by the decision or the outcome itself. Just in terms of its nature, randomly popping out. That's based in terms of me, and you can't really get more fundamental than that because an agent is a very special kind of cause. It's very unlike anything else, and that's why I'd say it's neither random, but again, it's neither deterministic. It's one of two outcomes that I just have an ability to choose between, and the answer doesn't get more fundamental.
I would pull in what my where I stand on this, and so I'm not hard determinist. I'm determinist under a probabilistic sense. So I like the fact that you mentioned about the probabilities there. But the way I would say is that free will doesn't actually exist. There's always a certain amount of possibilities that you are determined to follow one of those probabilities.
Right.
And it only becomes determined at the point of you actually carrying out that action. So it's still determined, but there's a certain set number of things that you can do. So you were always determined to carry out one of those probabilities. That's not free will. You haven't created any possibilities through your actions. You can only do a set number of things. Hence, that's why I hold to determinism.
All right.
And here's the thing about free will. When it comes to free will, I think what goes unsaid is that what makes it so special, this idea of free will, is that there is an experience that goes along with making a choice.
Right.
And that experience is different than, let's say, a billiard ball hitting another billiard ball and knocking it into the wall or something. There's an experience that goes along with it. So then the question is, as Katie just said, that there's reasons that goes on unconsciously before you even act on it, and you're only conscious of those things after or while you're acting on it. But there are processes like the Libet experiment shows us that there's unconscious ramping up that happens unconsciously that determine what your outcome is going to be, your behavior. And then you're conscious of that behavior after your brain has already determined it's going to do this and that. Now, someone could say, well, maybe the free choice happened before you're conscious of it. But the thing about that is you're not conscious of it. And so then we're kind of back at square one, because even those things that caused you to do this and that were determined by you being born at a certain age, speaking a certain language, being in a certain environment, so many things that you're unaware of or that was out of your control at some point in time. So the kind of free will that I'm talking about is the libertarian kind, where you're absolutely uncaused, you're absolutely an agent, a free agent. And when I say free, I mean absolutely free. It's like you can't be a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're either free or you're not. That kind of free. So now, whereas you can have this experience of freedom, and you can definitely be prohibited from doing what you want to do.
Right.
Like if someone puts a gun to your head and makes you do, but still, in essence, you're still going to do what you want to do relative to that situation. Like if someone says, you know what, you either give me your wallet or I'm going to shoot you.
Right.
And you're going to say, well, he took away my free will, so I had to give him my wallet. Well, no, he didn't. You gave him the wallet. You could have not given him the wallet and you'd have got killed, right? But you were still not free of that want to live. So you're always enslaved to something. Is the problem there?
Yeah. That obviously then raises the question as well, of why does it seem like we have free will? And there was a neuroscientist that led me to determinism, who was explaining this, and he explained it quite well, in the sense that, as Scott said, your actions are already happen before you are actually consciously aware of it. And he explained it in the sense of, well, with knowing that fact, if we didn't have the illusion of free will, then we would constantly, through our experiences, we would constantly be getting fearful of our own actions, questioning why those actions are happening. So the brain outputs free will, gives us the illusion that we are making that choice ourselves, so that we're not questioning every single action that we are carrying out.
Right. So a few things. One, just with the Libet experiment, that one has very interesting parameters because the choices there were more quick-paced. So that's one thing, but it doesn't really address situations where somebody is more deliberative, where you actually are kind of weighing the options, the pros, the cons, that sort of thing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I don't think it's really capturing the totality of our experience when it comes to choice. The second thing to bring up is, in terms of that intuition or that experience, I think that a lot of the time, yes, you might be able to give an explanation why we might have that experience and more or less explain it away. So, for example, and I know it's probably not backed up with as much scientific research, but a solipsist could just boil down your experiences to your consciousness and your consciousness alone. But the response there is something like what G.E. Moore did. It could be the case that solipsism is true. But if solipsism is true, then I don't have hands. But I do have hands. This is one hand, and this is the other hand. And it seems more obvious to me that I am actually experiencing hands than this whole mentally generated world around me. And if you don't believe me with your hands, I'll just show you with mine. Okay, he didn't make that part, but in terms of my own experience with my own will, I think that just stands out to me as being more obvious than just explaining it by a use of an evolutionary mechanism. And I think at here, and by the way, I'm not sure how many callers you guys want to get in. So if you want to wrap this up at any point, I won't feel like you're shooing me away from the show or anything. But maybe this might be a presupposition that we don't share. But I think if you're going to go with your common sense experience first, the free will option just seems to me to be far more evident than explaining it as a naturalistic mechanism. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on that would be that, it's all well and good to going off your common sense, what makes sense. But you've got to sort of ask the question, what is your method to actually getting to truth?
Right.
So I obviously, there's certain things that make sense to me and make sense to a lot of people, but then you've also got to that could suggest that particular common sense is true, but then you have to try to debunk that. So you've got to try and disprove everything that you not just prove it, but also disprove it. And if there's any other arguments which that also make sense in that way as well, then you can't then say that that is absolutely true. You've then got to start gathering more evidence to work out which of the arguments is true.
Right.
Yep. I was just going to say, it could very well be that we do have this thing called free will. As I said before, we could be in a cosmic dream. This could be, and all of this stuff can be coherent the same way. Like the mechanics of the dream works just like we would expect it to work in a materialistic world. Either way, our experience is what it is. So it's one of those things where, I don't claim to know because there's so much refutations from both sides. So I don't really claim to know the answer 100%. I can just bring up questions to refute your claims, and
Right.
and you can bring up the same thing, and we're just going to sit here and question each other's premises, and that's all great, and it just leads me to the same place that I still don't know anything. So, and I'm comfortable with that. I'm just totally comfortable with that. I'm a very genuine type of person,
Mm-hmm.
and like Katie was saying earlier, to believe in God is going to require like a huge turnaround in your life and the way you think and what you do and your actions and behaviors. And I don't know if I have enough evidence on either side to say there is no God, or yes, there is a God, or whatever the case may be. We didn't really talk about it too much, but there's a lot of questions I have about the morality of the Bible God. We can talk about slavery, talk about all of these other things, infanticide in the Bible. There's a whole lot of subjects that also play a role in my presuppositions to be careful about this kind of stuff. But I'll talk about that a little later, because
no worries. If you're interested,
before we continue, I'd like to welcome Chris to the conversation. Chris has just joined in. How are you doing?
I was talking about you. That's the guy I was talking about.
I think I'm well. I was mentioned prior to my entry.
Yep.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Specifically in what context? I just wonder if there's a relevant point I should articulate.
Oh, yeah. We were talking about free will paradox, the omniscience paradox. And I think we were talking about it one day, and you were saying that actually, you can argue the way I was arguing, but you were saying that mathematically you could make even that paradox go away somehow if you really drill into it. And of course, that's way above my pay grade. And I just grant you that there probably is mathematics to refute everything I'm sitting here saying. So, and it just leads me back to the same position that I really don't know what I'm talking about. Either way.
I can't speak to what you said, because I don't think like what was said is precise enough to make clear the point that I was articulating in reference to what you were stating. But I would say that free will is an interesting topic, but one challenge we have is to define what we mean by free. Because the colloquial definition of to be able to do otherwise not only makes implications about, say, the ontology of the system we exist in, right? But also it's not even clear, once you fix an ontology or define the parameters of the system, that being able to do otherwise would even be sufficient, right? Because if you imagine, say, the kind of an ontology where you have a sample space of outcomes that as of yet are undetermined, like a branching set of, like a tree, right? But on every path, your input into the system is so tenuous that effectively, even though you have this bevy of out possible sample spaces, in none of those paths do you quote unquote have a significant force behind what you do, so to speak, right? That is to say, if you were like on a current or something, which is slightly different than even conceding determinism if you factor in probability or something. So it's not even clear what we mean by free, but furthermore, it's not even clear if you fix for the system for all times t, one and only one path. So you kind of make a kind of ontology where, again, this doesn't comport with special and general relativity or modern quantum mechanics. I'm just saying, if you were to think of just a sequence of steps, and you imagine a possible world in which I don't know how it could exist, but where the only thing that exists is the thing, then for all times t, or really in that case, you're talking about for every step in that iterative process, if the only thing you can point to that did the thing was the thing, then it's not even clear relative to that system how the thing is not free, right? So, but that depends. What do we mean by free? Exactly. When we use the word, it kind of creates an illusion of precision that may not exist.
Exactly. So well put.
And there are
Go right ahead.
Oh, sorry. And there are sorry, there was something a little wrong with my feedback. And there are also moral implications as well. So, for example, let's say you have a society where people are free to do drugs. And let's not even say marijuana. Let's just go right out into the hard stuff. And as a result of that, people are debilitated. There are long-term social ill effects because of that. There are some libertarians who would push back on me about that, but let's grant it for the sake of argument here. other debilitating effects. More people are in prison for other tangential crimes. Less people have the ability to do stuff to achieve certain goals. Because there's one more freedom to do something, despite the fact that ultimately there's less freedom overall, is that society more or less free? So you have that moral implication too. As an example, you brought up the scenario of how about people in heaven? How are they not just potentially kicked out for transgressing against God? And if they can't, are they even free? Well, according to someone like St. Thomas Aquinas, he would say freedom is the ability to do the good. He wouldn't say, so if your only options were good things, but you could still select within those parameters, arguably you could be more free than less free, even though the range of possibilities is far wider.
Well, I think what you've actually identified is not so much something unique to whatever good would mean. It's more so an observation that if, you're talking about a classical Boolean system of logic. And so by virtue of that system, what you're really observing is that if you define S to be the set of all instances of free will, you're usually defining it on a subset of the set of things that defines the system the entity is in. The reason being, because if you say something is free, but it can't decide whether or not to be free, right? Then if your definition requires that the thing decide what it can be, including that it can decide what it can be, right? You may run into trouble. And so usually you define, therefore, on a subset of the total system, the autonomy or freedom of the thing. So in other words, it's not necessarily that it's the goodness that we're looking at as much as what Thomas Aquinas probably did was define it on a subset of the universal discourse. Right. And he called that the good, but maybe the real reason that happens to feel a little bit more satisfying to him is because when you define the freedom on a subset, and that's really related to classical axiomatic set theory doesn't have a set of all sets. So, if you let S be the set of all things you can do freely, and you argue that S is the set of everything, and you take the power set of that set, if in that power set, the result is a new element that is a doable thing, there's no onto function between those two sets by Cantor's theorem. So from that system of logic, you would have a contradiction that you then had the set of all doable things. So to avoid that, you might just say, well, you can't increase that without bound, or something like that. You'd put a bound on it. So you'd say a subset of the universal discourse.
So if I understand you properly, this kind of goes back into that old paradox. I'm trying to remember. Was it Russell's paradox?
Right.
The one where
if you let S be the set of all sets that are not members of themselves, then if it's in the set, it's not in the set, and if it is in the set, then it's not. Then it's not.
Yeah, and of course they had to do special mathematical set theory in order to get around that bit of an issue. Now, in terms of how you break it down, logically speaking, I am operating on classical. On a lot of classical presuppositions because, again, my philosophical background mostly tends to be scholastic in nature. Basically, everything that happens after Russell and the analytic school is a little above my pay grade. I only took about a first-year introduction to philosophy class that dealt with, first-order predicate logic. Yeah. And that's about it. I'm very novice to non-classical logics. I'm not a huge fan of metaphysically, of course. I'm not quite the huge fan, although I do like the idea of relative identity theory, but for other reasons. But just to go back to the free will topic at one point, so there is kind of a bounding, but also it has to deal with the notion that free will exists mostly as a practical necessity for morality. This is why certain ethicists and moralists have posited it. It's mostly related to the good or to some good end. Aquinas relativizes it towards one's good natural end or flourishing. So, for example, being a social, rational being, living within a society, getting along with others, raising a family, basically creating a system where biological creatures like us are known to flourish. He was also a biologist by training. And of course, there's our supernatural end, which is to obey, love God, follow his commandments, etc. So that's why it's always been kind of relativized to that end, and not just this more what's called voluntaristic about, finding the most unbound ways the will can express itself, and then just go from there. I think that's mostly a later Enlightenment innovation.
Well, is will always connected to wants? I mean, we'll break it down really simple. Would you say that the will is always determined by wants? And can you be free of your wants?
Okay, good question. So the good is not necessarily. So the good is what's called a teleological end or a proper end. It's in terms of causality, we're mostly used to thinking of it in mechanistic terms. So as I said, one gear moving another, or thinking about it.
I would stay well away from.
I'm sorry.
Because theoretical physics, we avoid the notion of causation for a very good reason, and that's because it's not well defined.
Well, true. Fair enough. I'm only using this because it's pedagogically speaking, it's the one we're most used to.
Yeah, but so what do you think? Why do you think I'm a law? So I don't know if you know me, but I specialize in pure mathematics, and I'm exploring continuous systems of logic, but I do a lot of theoretical physics. And in exploring that, I've learned a lot of general relativity and quantum mechanics. And when you go into that, when people talk about causation, you can tell that the way they think of it is like a sequence. That.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were kind of talking.
You're almost thinking sequentially, and I'm.
Yep.
Is there a screen share option in this interface?
I believe there is. If you go down to the bottom, it says create a secondary stream. I think that would be it.
No,
yeah, I don't see that.
Oh, is that? Yeah, that might be it. Yeah.
Can you guys see this?
Microsoft Paint. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you fix a reference frame, right? So if I just put a point in, I don't have time to define the space that we're talking about. So right now, even though it's like a potentially non-Euclidean space, that's special. So special relativity technically is defined in a fixed reference frame on hyperbolic space. It's like a hyperboloid, and this is geometry on which things are done. But we're not gonna get into that. I'm just gonna, for now, the caveat there is that when I say a straight line, technically, I'm talking about curved space. So there's straight lines in a curved space-time geometry. But I just want that to be a caveat, because I'm not going to get into all the math, because it would take years to get up the differential geometry for us to really deeply explore this. But I just want to say, if you pick a point in this space, okay, and you define R to be the distance that light travels in a time t, right? Now, let's claim, and this isn't just an axiom, there's a large set of axioms that we can build to arrive at this. That light is the fastest traveler in this space-time interval R, meaning that if light travels a distance R, macroscopically, we're not talking about quantum entanglement, then for any point here, right, that is a distance R prime, such that R prime is greater than R, right? Then there's been no causal relationship macroscopically between those things in time t. So what we do is we basically take this curved space-time, okay, and this is really complicated, but we take infinitesimal change. So we let R get really small, but the argument is similar, okay? And within a small neighborhood of that curved space, we can actually do something called flattening the curve within fanciful mathematics and make an analogous two-dimensional compression of the n-dimensional curved geometric spacetime. And then we put those in cookie slices. So now, this is an n-dimensional sphere on the curved geometry, but we compress this to a little disk that is a two-dimensional analog with its own radius. And obviously the radius is kind of analogous to that radius for that sphere of the distance light would travel at that time, right? Now, as time increases, the sphere expands, right? How far light can travel expands, right? So then what we do is for these infinitesimal amounts, as time increases, we get a light cone, right? So if you pick 2 points in space, then this boundary here is light speed. That's the boundary at which light would be there at that time. So this is the present, this is the future, and this is the past. Now, this is why I'm just going to start to illustrate how complicated this can be. Is we usually talk about causation as intersections of light cones, because the idea here is that the points where those light cones intersect are analogous to the minimum time needed for light between observers. This is in the same reference frame now, 2 have met. So this is to say, so objects along this are light-like, these are time-like, and these are space-like separated. So there's more to time than just, the future, the past, and the present. There's the elsewhere in time as well. Right here, there's the elsewhere in time. But the point I'm making, okay, is one implication this has is if this is, say, what you would call an effect, right? Do you notice that one problem we have is that what exactly is the cause? Well, if you think this initial state and this initial state are the cause, then actually we're in trouble potentially, because then for any effect, we have at least one cause, not one and only one cause, right? And as this goes backward further and further, we could get tons of potential causes. But also it's is the cause the whole system and how it all, in other words, are you looking at it like really how things are playing out is that this is all on one hyperdimensional geometric object, and that the properties that
within a system trying to make sense of the entire system.
In other words, you have to understand, is it that the whole system and its properties that are consistent determine how this propagates? So is the effect and cause relationship like even defined point-wise, or is it defined there? It's not even clear. And that's why we don't talk about cause and effect. Maybe if we're hand-waving, we will, right? Our intuition. But this gets even worse at a quantum level, because when you follow the equations down to the quantum level, one possible implication is that there can be a way things are. And this is separate from quantum indeterminacy, okay? That there can be a way things are, but it doesn't lead anywhere. And what I mean by that is you try to take the states of the system and you try to put them all in a permuted order. So this state, this state, this state, and you try to put them all so that at no point when you have a parameter t, as it maps forward with some kind of orientation, that the equations hit every state. You will never be able to capture all the states. So you can't put a flow to it. Now this goes away at a macroscopic scale as you scale up, the wave function collapses and you get this capacity for flow. But so it may not even comport across all scales in the universe. There may not even be a way things are in the sense that we understand it at all scales. And so, we understand a lot, but we still have a long ways to go until, because it's a lot like when people talk about causation in relation to God, right? And the beginning of the universe, they'll say, well, for every effect, there is one cause. And they're thinking of it sequentially, but you can already see this picture doesn't make that clear at all.
That's right.
It's not even obvious how you get from whatever a cause is to an initial cause for a system. But even so, even if somehow you define it in a way that it's sequential, right? That's not enough, because you can define objects like, say, on the number line, 0 and 1, this interval, right? You can define sets that have sequences that will infinitely approach but never reach this. In other words, you can define 1 over n and show that for every positive integer n, that 1 over n is in that set, no matter how big n is, right? It's only at infinity that you converge to 0. But for any finite n, you'll have it'll grow without bound, but you will never, there's no minimum to this set. In other words, if you claim, if you let x in the set, we'll call it I, be the minimum, right? Okay, well then by definition, x is greater than 0, right? Okay, well then take x over 2. For x positive, x over 2 is less than x, because x over 2 less than x implies that x is less than 2x, which is true because x plus x is 2x and x is strictly positive. So obviously that can't be right. There's no minimum to that set. There's no smallest element in that set. And so the one possibility is that the boundary of the universe is an asymptotic limit. And that's actually what the Hawking-Hartle no boundary condition is essentially very simply trying to say, is that is That is an asymptotic limit that you approach, not something that you actually reach, right? But it's not even clear. And that's what I'm saying. When we talk about causation, if we're talking about it as though it's something as simple as something sequential that we can follow and track like a line, we're out of our depth.
Right.
Christopher, I love you, man. You're a beautiful mind. They should make a movie about you, in fact.
No.
Call it a beautiful Oh, wait, never mind. That one.
I tell you what, you're way over my head, but I get your point 100%. And this is why I'm.
You have to understand, most of what I've said is technically not correct. Yeah. It's just been simplified because we don't. I'd have to go to this whiteboard and we'd have to do a lot of differential equations.
Yeah.
So I
have a question.
Oh.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Is everything that you just said, does that reference God as the fundamental starting point, or is it without reference to God?
I'd say, I mean, that I don't fundamentally know, right? Because I don't even know what a God is.
Okay. So in other words, it would be then without reference to God then.
That's not what that means. If I say not P, that doesn't. So that's like saying what you just did was misapply a negation operator. You're trying to treat it like
I'm talking about that God would be what is ultimate. Hold on, I got to turn something off here. Okay.
Darth Dawkins. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I say God, when I say God, I'm referring to what is singularly ultimate, dictating.
Right, but wait, just stop.
May I finish, please? No, I'm not going to stop. You're not going to cut me off. No, I'm not going to stop. You're going to let me finish. Okay. I sat here for a long time, quiet, and you're over talking me. Okay.
That's because you've already made a mistake.
If you want to be rude, be my guest, but I'm going to keep on talking until I finish. Now, if the host wants to mute me, he can do that.
I claim that I have a very relevant point.
Okay, good. I want to answer what you said. What is a God? And I want to answer it. And you're not going to overtalk me, or you guys can kick me. All right. Now, you said, "What is a God?" And I said,
"You said it's ultimate."
And my question is, why? Again, you're overtalking me again. All right. I'm not hogging the microphone. Now, you asked me, what is a God? So in my question, I'm defining God, and the question is that which is ultimate, that dictates all possibility and impossibility, and is personal. Now, either everything that you just said there, all of the relationships, the regularities, the parameters, reference God, as I have defined, or it does not reference God.
No, that does not follow from a Boolean. If you're applying a Boolean classical system of logic, that does not follow at all. But
no, it's a true dichotomy. Either it references God or not.
Yeah,
either it references God or not.
All right, let me explain something to you. I'm going to make a couple of points, okay? The first point I want to address is when you say God is ultimate, I'm worried about that. Because if you're defining that across multiple dimensions and some of those dimensions are quantized and unbounded, that doesn't make any fucking sense because there's no greatest integer n. And so,
I'm not talking
if there's
about
no
math.
biggest real number.
I'm not talking about
and
math.
Just let me finish what I'm saying.
Yeah,
if there's no biggest real number, okay? And there exists at least one dimension for which it is quantized and unbounded, it doesn't make sense to call that dimension as having an ultimate value. So I don't even know if that makes sense. You see, I think we should slow down and look at what we're saying.
Yeah, you're not even listening to me. Okay, I didn't mention numbers. I didn't mention physics. I asked you a metaphysical question. Okay,
right. And now let's get to the attempt at logic, which I claim was lacking.
Yeah, what I want to know is so do you reject the notion that in your worldview, metaphysical worldview, do you reject the notion that there is something that is singular that institutes possibility and impossibility? Do you reject that?
I'm going to tell you, I don't fundamentally know, but if you're talking about that from like a system of classical Boolean logic, that doesn't follow. There's no set of all sets.
Okay, I didn't mention anything that you just said.
You apply Cantor's
All I
theorem.
asked you was, is there something that is singular, one thing, as opposed to independent things that are dictating all possibility and impossibility?
What do you mean by singular? What do you mean by singular?
I mean that it's one thing as opposed to a plurality.
That you can put everything in one group?
No, I'm asking you.
What do you mean?
I asked you the question. I'm trying to explain it to you. I said, is everything you say, does it reference God as ultimate or not? That's all.
But how can you say a thing is singular when you're distinguishing the thing from the concept of singularity, right?
Do you know what a true dichotomy is?
Fundamentally, I don't know.
Okay. So you don't know what a true dichotomy is.
I would claim that you are the one actually that doesn't understand what A and not A really is.
Okay. So
Do
you
you
don't
want to
have
explore that?
Yeah,
Because I'd
I
love
want
to
to
talk
know
about the
if
set
you
theory.
believe all of the regularities that you invoke, do they derive and depend on what I refer to as God, or do the regularities exist without reference or derivation of God? That's all I want to know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what
So
any of the terms
I didn't ask you
fundamentally
if you know. I said either they reference God or you don't reference God.
No,
Okay.
or there's some other option that you haven't considered.
You're not understanding. Okay.
I do. You think that you're applying a classical. You're applying a classical Boolean system of logic.
Do you know how to have an adult conversation?
Let him respond. Yeah.
You're assuming a Boolean classical binary truth value system of logic, whereby for every proposition there is two and only two truth values, true and false, but not both. And I'm telling you that's not consistent with modern quantum mechanics. We use continuous systems.
I'm not discussing quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics is part of reality, though.
You're not understanding. Okay.
What I'm trying to tell you is that there exist systems of logic where truth values are n-ary or even continuous truth values, and it's not as simple as what you're saying. And I don't know which.
What fundamentally determines what you just said?
I don't know. It's what I'm trying to tell you.
So therefore, you're just speculating.
Fundamentally, yes.
Good. Then why should I listen to anything you say?
I don't know.
So you just pwned yourself.
No, I don't think it's that simple.
No. You said you don't know why anything is. So then why should I listen to you say what is and cannot be?
Right, but my inability to answer that doesn't necessarily imply what you're extrapolating it does. And
no, you don't know why you don't. Okay,
exactly.
Is a Boolean? Okay, listen. Do you know fundamentally why anything is, can be, or cannot be?
I can show you a set and its complement in a system of logic that have a non-empty intersection.
That's not an answer to my question.
In a framework.
That's not an answer to my question. Listen carefully, all right? You can hide behind all sorts of mathematical nomenclature all you want to try to bamboozle me. I'm not stupid. What I want to know from you is there anything that fundamentally
does there exist an X such that
I'm talking here.
I'm just formalizing what you're saying. Okay? Does there exist an X such that?
Okay, you see, are you autistic?
No.
Then stop interrupting me.
Yes.
No, then he's being very rude. Then tell him to stop cutting me off.
I think you're just
he has interrupted me.
You're not used to talking to someone who just clarifies your points.
And you guys aren't saying a word. And when I point out he's being rude, and I'm saying, are you autistic? Because if you are, then there's a reason why you're interrupting me all this time.
You know what I find
you guys don't say a word to him, do you? You guys are hypocrites.
All right, I've got a question.
All I know is
he
never called anyone. All I know is he never disparaged a group of people.
I didn't disparage anybody. I just asked him if he had a neurological condition.
You just did.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. If I take X to be 1 over n for all n in the set of positive integers, right? What is the total set of the union of all of those values?
I couldn't answer that because I'm not good with math. What I would like to know from you is.
So you can't answer that.
I don't have an answer to that. I don't have. I'm not schooling. Okay, I am not schooling you on mathematics. I am not schooling you on physics. I am asking you a question about your worldview. Okay, you're interrupting me. Would you not interrupt me, please?
Actually,
okay,
Chris,
you are extremely rude. Okay. Now, I am not discussing mathematics. I'm not discussing physics. I asked you a question about your model of reality. I ask you, in your view, all right, you're talking about all sorts of regularities of what is, can be, and cannot be.
No, some things that exist are neither of those.
Okay, listen to me carefully. Were you discussing what is, can be, and cannot be?
No, I was saying that
so that you weren't talking about anything.
Talking him down.
Okay.
Let him
it's interesting. It's interesting.
Let me
so you
do
speak up when I ever talk, and when he does it, you don't.
No, I just did. I just told Chris that he would.
Okay, good. I'm glad we're going to have some decorum
interrupting him.
Good. Now, so you're not discussing what is, can be or cannot be?
I'm going to show you what I'm discussing. All right.
No, I just want an answer to that question.
It's not simple, but I'm going to show you.
I don't
want
to see a math lesson. I want to know, are you telling me what is?
So let S be a set, okay?
Listen, I don't care about the math.
In the set S,
I don't care about the math. I have a simple question.
This is part of his answer, Dar.
In 0, 1.
Let him finish.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all Greek to me. I don't understand that. What I want to know is, are you telling me?
I'm trying to explain to you.
Listen to the question and I'll shut up. Okay? Focus on the question. I don't want to hear mathematical equations. All I want is a simple answer to a simple question. Are you telling me about what is, can be, and what cannot be?
No, I'm telling you about something deeper than that.
Then if it's deeper, then how can you get outside of what is, can be, and what cannot be? There's nothing outside of that.
I'm trying to show you.
No,
and you won't let me.
No, what you're saying is it's outside of what is, right? So if it's outside of what actually is, then it's what something can be. Or you're telling me what can't be. Are you telling what you showing me is what is?
No, not necessarily.
Are you telling me what can? Okay, so you're not telling me what is. Okay. Are you telling me then what can be?
Can I ask you a question? How am I going to explain this advanced concept to you without like writing it down and explain? This is not something that you can summarize in a sentence.
I'm not asking for an advanced concept. I'm asking you a worldview question. I'm not asking you. Are you under the impression that I'm asking you a question about physics?
No, this isn't physics. This is logic. Good. I specialize in logic.
Okay. Now, so are these logical absolutes?
No.
Okay, then why should anybody's thinking conform to it?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. So everything you say is because of I don't know?
That's not what I said. I don't think.
Okay, so why these logics? Okay, are they conventional or are they universal, absolute, and invariant?
You can't have a universal system of logic. For any system of logic, there's at least one boundary proposition for that system that's neither provable nor You're not letting me finish.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
There's at least one boundary proposition P for any discrete system of logic such that P is neither provable nor disprovable by any of the axioms in that system. So Euclid's fifth postulate, I'm not finished.
Is that from a naturalistic framework?
You're going to get kicked.
No, I'm just asking for
Euclid's fifth postulate, as Gauss showed, is neither provable nor disprovable by the other Euclidean postulates. If you accept it, you get Euclidean geometry. If you reject it, you get non-Euclidean. There's no one system of logic.
How do you know that?
Because on the assumption that there is, you derive a contradiction.
So in other words, there's not an omniscient God then?
Now, I will make one distinction. There is a possibility.
I asked you a question.
If you ask a question,
you said that. Yeah, the question is: so there's not an omniscient God?
That doesn't follow from what I've said at all.
No, that's a question. I didn't say it followed. I just asked you a question. You said there's an incompleteness that we can never know anything. Okay.
I never said that technically, and I was trying to explain that there may be a difference between like the constraints of a discrete system of logic. And like a thing that is logic if existing. Yeah. So in other words,
what is it that fundamentally imposes what is?
I don't know. I don't even know what is means.
What is how things actually are now.
I don't think it's that simple.
No, it's not a matter of simple. All I want to know is there something that dictates what's possible and impossible? Since you don't believe in God, I'd like to know, is there anything at all that dictates what's possible or impossible?
I don't fundamentally know.
So when you're telling us about what is, can be, giving us all these explanations about quantumness and physics and mathematics, it's all based upon you don't know that.
No, I think there's a difference in that. I'm trying to say that I can't prove it. Fundamentally.
Oh, so then how would I differentiate what you are saying from just pure fantasy?
Fundamentally, I don't know.
So then why should we listen to anything you say?
You see, but I claim that I don't see how you've escaped the same problem.
That's not an answer to my question. What you just did now is a tu quoque fallacy. I'm just asking you about your worldview.
What is that? All right, tell me what this fallacy you purport that I've committed.
Tu quoque, it means you too. It means you have the same problem.
Explain it more precisely.
It means that if you don't have a basis, a foundation as to what's possible and impossible, you say, well, you have that same problem too.
No, that doesn't follow, because I don't know if there are rules that
have you ever heard? Have you ever heard?
You understand what I'm saying?
Have you ever heard of tu quoque?
Yes, but I'm trying to show you that a lot of things people call.
Did you do that?
All right, I'm trying to explain to you that a lot of things people call fallacies.
Continue, Chris, because you've been trying to get a point out for a while now, and he's just trying to direct the conversation. So you say whatever you want to say. He's muted.
Well, I mean, what I've been trying to say is, if you define a set where you define what's called a cardinality of membership for every object in the set, okay, then you can expand classical set theory, okay, and beyond the notion of there is in and out of the set. You can define things that can't wholly exist in a way that we classically think. And this is like an introduction of how to start thinking about quantum mechanics. So for an example, so the idea here is this: you can define what's called a complement. So S complement, okay? And you define it as follows, that for every epsilon. So now with this new idea, the epsilon, which is the cardinality of membership for every object that belongs to the set, is defined on an interval 0, 1 inclusive, okay? That's arbitrary, you can define it otherwise, but it's usually 0, 1 because this introduction helps people who are learning think of it as, like, intuitively a probability that something is in the set, or the degree or amount that something is in the set, right? But now just we'll adapt a new notation, okay? So I'm just gonna draw some examples. So if I have 1 and 0.5, this two tuple will be the object. So it doesn't have to be a 1, okay? This could be a square, whatever, right? And this will just be the degree of membership. So now, technically, this is what's interesting, is you can define this on top of a set where everything does certainly exist in the universe of discourse, and you're pulling things in and out of that, or the universe of discourse itself can be defined in this way. But however you do that, then notice that anything in the universe of discourse, everything would have, all of these things would have some degree of cardinality of membership. And if it was 0, that would mean it's not in the set. Does everyone follow what I'm saying? So we intuitively think cardinality of 0 means it is not, and cardinality of 1 means it is. Right. Okay, so if we think of it that way, I claim that doing that, we can derive, if we consider the set S, okay, defined such that epsilon sub x equals 1/2 for all x in the set, okay? So the cardinality of membership for everything in the set is 1/2. This is really weird now, because let's now, and notice I want to make something clear. We have not changed or actually lost classical logic in this. We have expanded, because to get back to classical logic, you just restrict the interval to the numbers 0, 1. You restrict the cardinality of membership to be 0 or 1 and not both. You see that? We've only expanded. We haven't lost anything. We're enriching the language.
Have we given up bivalence in this?
Well, yeah, we haven't, and let me show you why. This is really what I'm trying to build to. Right. Let's take now S complement, okay? Well, let's define the complement as follows: that for every x in this new set from the universe of discourse, we define the cardinality of 1 minus epsilon of x, where this is the cardinality of membership to S, right? So let's check that this reduces back to the classical case. So if in the classical case we have 0 and 1 and no other options, right? So then if it's not in the set, the complement 1 minus 0 is what? 1. It is in the complement. If it is in the set, cardinality membership is 1, then 1 minus 1 is 0. It's not in the complement. So everyone see that we have not lost, again, classical logic. We're just building on top of that. Does everyone see that? Is everyone following me?
Yeah.
Because we're almost there. Okay. So now if epsilon is 1/2, right? This is where we get something weird. Because then the set S and the set S complement are the same set. But notice that this even invites us to realize that there's a broader sense of complementation, because now there's the function that can send, no matter what the cardinality of membership is, all of them to 0. And that's not the same operation as what we previously defined. So there's even a bigger way to negate these kind of sets than we initially had. Does everyone see how this builds complexity? But notice that then what you realize is, of course, S intersect S complement, this is necessarily an empty set when you reduce back to 0, 1, because then the only degree of membership is 1 and 0. And by definition, then 1 minus 1 is 0, or 1 minus 0 is 1. Either way, you're going to have an empty intersection. Now, notice that what this kind of points out is the whole notion of contradiction A and not A is not fundamentally an existent structure. Technically, what you're doing is these are very clear objects with very special properties. This is a very clear operation defined on these objects, and this operates on this, and these together. A contradiction is not a thing that seems to propagate across multiple dimensions. That's why equality defined between numbers is very different than equality defined between sets. And the point I'm making here is that a contradiction then is technically, it's not nonsense. And in Boolean logic, it's not nonsense. It's a proposition that's always false. Okay, but that's in a Boolean system of logic. Notice that here, this is not necessarily empty. And so if these are sets of propositions, there's an even broader notion of what we're trying to capture in this advanced system of logic. You see, so it's very complicated.
Go ahead.
And that's why it's really technically, when we have like A and not A, we're just saying A is a proposition that by definition has 2 and only 2 truth values, T and F, where T and F are usually 0 and 1, and the complementation, that is the negation, is the complementation of the membership function, which is to say switch them around. So in other words, give it a 0 or 1. And then that conjunction, therefore, will never be true, because if A is true, the negation is defined as just changing the truth value to false. And the conjunction is defined as true if and only if both are true. But notice these are all defined, right? These fit together in a very precise way that if you're not very precise about what is going on, what system of logic you're using, basically it's like doing geometry. You have to think about the space on which the geometry is done. And if you don't think about that, then a straight line on curved space-time geometry may be very different from a curved line in a Euclidean geometry. And so the system of logic you use is kind of the geometry on which the conversation occurs, in a way. And it's very difficult to... That's why when people are novices at logic, they try to think in terms of fallacies. That's a sign that they don't understand logic, okay? I've never met a logician that fundamentally defers to quote-unquote fallacies.
Out of curiosity, would you mind if I ask you something? Usually when in classical systems you get some kind of contradiction, such as that, it's
automatic. Not A, yeah,
not
right.
A, yeah.
Proof by contradiction, right? You're asking very aptly, why do we do that then?
Yes, exactly. So would you say that whenever somebody does show a contradiction, they haven't shown something which is necessarily case-minded independently, however you want to parse that out?
Correct. It's only showing that in that system, the truth value as defined isn't satisfied, right? So in other words, it's really, as you say, existing on the geometry of that logic, so to speak, if the analogy holds. You're very right to observe that.
Right. So another question I wanted to ask is, from an epistemic level, though, not a logical one, but epistemic, if someone is to show that somebody is saying A and not A, or they derive that conclusion, would it then, therefore, could one still say it's still very unlikely that that would be the case?
Well, all right, I want to draw your attention to when you say epistemic. Now you have to pay attention to, is the way you're thinking of epistemic technically built on a discrete system of Boolean logic? Because it is that maybe a limiter to the broader sense in which to think about that.
Just to clarify, when I say epistemic, I mean just the way I decide which propositions I accept as being the case.
Right, I understand what you mean. Yeah. Okay. I understand what you mean. I'm just trying to point out that the very idea, right, is kind of built on which this or that. And it thinks in a way that almost reveals the kind of logic it's built on. Okay? And that's what I'm trying to warn you against, is that when people are new to logic and novices at it, you have to understand you only get to this level after like 7+ years in logic, where you're really advanced and you're doing like pure mathematical proofing. And that's why people who just write down syllogisms, in their mind, it's as simple as A and not A, right? They don't, and it's I don't fundamentally know. Okay, I don't. But for my dissertation, I'm hoping to explore what's called a continuous system of logic, which is it doesn't use discrete symbols. And what I want to draw your attention to is, do you notice that in this expansion, we did not lose anything? We built on top of what was already there. Just like with the complex numbers, you did not lose the real numbers. You added something. The idea is, can we make the language rich enough to where there's some maximum richness? And we're at the limit at this point where the constraints seem to be the very discreteness of language in reference to these systems. And so I'm trying to explore systems that don't use discrete syntax.
I see. Well, I shouldn't say I see as in, I fully get what you're understanding. I'm very new to this, so I'm not trying to, please don't think I'm trying to keep up.
Questions, you can always question and you can always expand on things, and it's just not as simple.
That's not what I've said, though. I mean, I don't know what I've said. Okay, to be clear, it's complicated. It's but I and that's part of the difficulty here, is that it's like, when you expand to the complex numbers, you can prove that pi is equal to -I times the natural log of -1. But we don't define the natural log for negative numbers, do we?
No, we don't. We call it an imaginary number.
Right. So, but the word kind of makes people think there's nothing real about it, or there's nothing. But what is a number is the deeper question there. And, so you can define a geometry on an empty set. All you have to do is define a function d, okay, from the set S to R. Or not even R, just the number, the set containing 0 and 1, okay?
Right.
And do it as follows: that d of xy equals 0 if and only if x equal y. So if they're the same object, however you define equality on the objects, right?
Right.
Because that equality is not, that's another thing. People talk about equality as though it's the same concept, bridge between everything, and that's not true. It's defined very differently on different things. That's why you have equivalence classes and stuff. But anyway, define d of xy equal to 1 if, what are you going to guess it is? X not equal to y. Notice that, again, we're thinking discretely here. You could make this richer. But anyway, if this is the case, right, well, then let's look at what happens. Just in this classical framework, then it satisfies the following properties. First of all, notice that it's 0 or 1. So dxy, by definition, then, is greater than or equal to 0 for all xy. Already starting to look like a notion of distance, isn't it? Well, look at this. dxy equals 0 if and only if, xy are equal, right? But also notice that since dxy equals 1 or 0, that dxy is less than or equal to dx plus dy. That's just the distance between those and 0. It satisfies the triangle on a property. It satisfies being non-negative. And it's 0 if and only if the point's at the same point in question. You can define a distance function on any set, even the empty set, and now you can do an entire geometry on a set without even talking about numbers.
Interesting. May I ask you a question about identity as opposed to contradiction?
Yeah.
All right. So are you familiar with relative identity theories?
Yeah, but I want to paint something clear to you now. After what we discussed, I want you to understand that contradiction in the classical Boolean case, because I think that's the case you're talking about, is not nonsense. That's not what it means. It is a proposition that is by form always false.
I see.
And that's important because you can argue from a contradiction validly, right? As you said, suppose P, contradiction, not P, meaning you can start from the contraposition now. So in other words, you can start from what most people would see as a contradiction, and that can be a valid starting point in pure logic. That's so weird, but you can start with right? Because what I'm trying to say is if you want to argue P implies Q, right?
Right.
You can also say not Q implies not P, the contraposition, right?
Right.
But if this is a union, then you can also end up possibly with something that starts from a false value. If Q is true, then not P would imply you're starting from a false argument position, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the false argument form happens to be A and not A, as long as you end with something that's false, that is actually fine. So I don't want you to start thinking that contradiction means nonsense. That's a misconception. It's just always false in a Boolean classical system.
All right. So contradiction. So contradiction being nonsense, it differs from a contradiction as we typically understand it.
Right. What nonsense is, I don't know.
Right. By nonsense, it usually means the person can comprehend both A and not A at the same time.
I don't know. I don't know what nonsense is fundamentally.
I think that's how vulgar. That's how I think of it in a vulgar sense. I'll say that much. But yeah, we're speaking about relative to the logical system we're using. So, for example, in some systems of logic, it's possible that if you have not P, therefore you have P. But in other systems, you can't make that inference.
That's right. Even in the Boolean system,
right,
care needs to be taken. Like with Darth Dawkins trying to say it's this or it's not this. So that would be as problematic as me saying, for example, if you're not wet, you're dry. No, not necessarily, because another possibility of you not being, wet is you don't exist. Mm-hmm. If you mean existence in the classical Boolean sense, right?
Right. So
meaning if you start from not existence and negate that doesn't land you in existing as wet. So you got to be very careful when you then apply a double negation. Mm-hmm. And that's why some logicians don't like when people apply double negations as being the same as the initial proposition. It needs to be done with care. Yeah, because technically the only reason we're able to seamlessly do that in Boolean logic is because we forced a rigidity on the definition to where, listen, all negation means is switching the truth value of the defined proposition. You're not changing anything. The proposition is fixed. The truth value is flipped, and that's it.
Yeah, I actually had a professor of mine tell me about a case where a mathematician proved something by negating the contrary, and a lot of other people in the field were like, yeah, it doesn't really work, or they had issues with that. I couldn't really remember the case off the top of my head. So
there are many fields of mathematicians, like, for example, there are constructionists. Mm-hmm. There are people who don't believe infinity. Of course, they struggle to, they kind of struggle when you're like, okay, but is there a greatest positive integer n? No, but there's a difference then between talking about all of that at once and one step at a time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that doesn't actually give you infinity, saying there's no greatest integer n. But notice that it is concerning, say, if you use terms like absolute or greatest of an entity, because if you're talking about any parameterized dimension, that's unbounded, meaning there's no maximum for that system, right? And notice a max doesn't mean, I want to draw your attention to this subtle detail, which I claimed that when I explained this to Darth Dawkins, he didn't get. A max doesn't mean, so no max doesn't mean it can always get bigger. It can also mean that it can asymptotically approach but never reach the boundary point of the system, even though it's bounded. So look at the set of all x, so 0 less than x less than 1. Just as there's no minimum to that set, right? Let x be the minimum. It's greater than 0. Divide it by 2. It's strictly positive. That's less than x. Contradiction. We said x was the minimum, but now there's a smaller one. There can't be a min. You can also show in a classical system under those constraints, there's no max to this, but it is bounded because it's less than 1, right? So you can have no maximum, but it's bounded. So even if there's a defined, the nature of how something can be good or bad can be such that, and that's why care needs to be taken when we say the best at something even, because it may turn out that even when the constraints are bounded, the nature of how that exists prevents us from having a maximum of how it can instantiate across any particular system or in any sense, and that's, that's kind of some nuance there. But notice that all kind of is from the system of logic in which we are discussing this, right? We'd have to change fundamentally how we structure our sentences to not structure them in a way that is like this is or is not.
Yeah, it's like saying the King of France has hair. Like, I think that's the example Bertrand Russell used when he was wrestling with notions of existence. The King of France doesn't actually exist. So what does it mean to say he has hair or doesn't have hair? How can you say that's true or false? Yeah.
Before we continue, I'm going to be shutting the stream down because we're massively over time. But it's been an absolutely great conversation, and me and Scott haven't really had to do much at the end here. So thank you very much, Chris. We've had a nice, easy time.
Oh, can I also apologize for Darth Dawkins' behavior? I know his faults aren't my responsibility, but that's just not a way to behave with other people.
I'm not really offended. I understand how he probably felt upset, but I claim that when I interjected, it's not because I'm not listening. I claim to the contrary. I don't fundamentally know, but I claim it's because I've listened very carefully and I've seen a lot of problems, and I want to start to go in and I'm trying to open up. I think he thinks he understands logic, and
you see it right off the top that there's problems.
I don't think he knows where the punches are even coming from.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
I think Darth Dawkins thinks he understands a lot of things when he clearly doesn't. That's sort of, and he seems to get pissed off. He's made a career out of getting pissed off at people, so I wouldn't take it too personally that he, gets pissed off. That's just what he does. But yeah, as I say, I'm going to shut the stream down. I did get a little bit heated there when Darth came in, but that's entertaining stuff for the viewers, so that's good. Thank you everyone for who's been in the chat. We'll be back next week. This is a weekly thing, and hopefully we get some decent callers in next week. So please stay tuned for that. And as always, please remember, ignorance is never bliss. And thank you and good night.
Good night.
Right.
Be hopeful and try not to undo that which was built all around me. Take it all the way back to the melody. All we want is attack back where we wanna be, and all we had was our ways about it all. I think you don't know now, but it could be so much better yet. I just need a band to save me. I just need a song of hope, and I wish somebody would amaze me still and not make me feel like I'm alone. I will believe while lost and still broken. There's a light and a way out, only to say now.